It's Acoustic Paint, I'm Elizabeth, and today we're going to be comparing Hotpress watercolor paper with Coldpress watercolor paper. And we're jumping right into it. As you can see, I'm currently working on the Coldpress watercolor paper. The clip at the beginning wasn't super detailed, but the Coldpress watercolor paper is actually more textured than Hotpress, and that's kind of the main differentiation between the two. And I tend to practice more on Coldpress watercolor paper. I like to use Canson XL mixed media, which has a similar texture to Coldpress watercolor paper. I also do a lot of my original paintings on cut Canson XL Coldpress watercolor paper. That's a mouthful. And today is actually the first time I've tried using Hotpress watercolor paper, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's get into exactly what I'm painting. As you can probably tell, I'm painting an eye for the Coldpress painting, and I'm also going to be painting an eye for the Hotpress painting. The reason I chose that is because they're fairly simple to draw, and they lend themselves to a bunch of creative colors, which I'm using. I'm also using the Poems About You watercolors. I don't think I've actually mentioned them on my channel, but I have mentioned them extensively on the blog, so if you want to check that out, the link will be in the description. Anyway, back to the paper. I'm using the Legion paper, the Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press. I picked these up at the Blick art store in Columbus, which was really fun. It's actually pretty small, as you can see. It's 2.5 by 3.75, and it's 140 pounds. I almost said 50. And I don't actually have a lot to say about this paper. It is a little bit different from the normal paper that I use that I mentioned, but overall, I mean, it was a pleasant experience. It didn't layer super well, which I was a little surprised about. It layered well enough, but the paper pilled really fast. It didn't take water very well, which was kind of annoying, but that could just be user error on my part. But because the paper is so textured, it kind of gave a little bit more depth to the piece, if that makes sense. The watercolor would settle kind of into the grooves, and that kind of gave it a little bit more contrast and more interesting. I don't know the correct words. It was more interesting to look at because of the textured paper. Overall, I didn't dislike working with this paper. I definitely prefer the Canson watercolor paper, but obviously that's just my preference. I would say if you're newer to watercolor or you don't have a lot of experience, Coldpress would probably be the way to go just because it's so common, but definitely all up to you. Now let's move on to the Hotpress watercolor paper. Now, if I'm being completely honest, it was at this point that I forgot that I was supposed to be filming kind of a compare and contrast video because I was listening to The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie on audiobook, and it was the last 10 minutes where everything gets revealed, and I had never read this book before, so I was kind of on the edge of my seat. I spoiled myself a little bit by looking things up on the internet, but not because I wanted to. I just needed to look at the title, and all of the internet questions are like, who committed the crime? Who did this? Who did that? And that was a little frustrating, but I was on the edge of my seat and completely forgot that I was supposed to be kind of taking this as a review. So I did just treat this as if it were any other normal painting. I did notice that the paint washes kind of went down a little bit smoother, which is because I looked it up, of the hot press of the finish of the watercolor paper. That was a roundabout way of saying that the paper is smoother than the cold press, and so it kind of lends itself to smoother washes, even though I don't think I used enough water just in general watercolor application, so it looks a little choppy in this video. Did really enjoy using the Hotpress watercolor paper. It almost seemed like this painting took less time than the cold press paper just because everything layered a little bit nicer, everything was really smooth. It was very workable, which I thought was really nice. Obviously I'm struggling in this clip, but still very, very nice. There aren't so many differences between the papers that I can give you a definitive pro-cons list. It's really up to personal preference. I think I'll be doing more research into hot press paper myself. I do really enjoy using cold press because I like the texture, but the smoothness and the layerability of this hot press specifically, which is also Legion Stonehenge, I just had to look, Legion Stonehenge hot press, I think the blendability and the layerability is really nice, so I'll personally be looking into that, but again, always personal preference and things like that. And if you're curious, after the 15 minutes of listening to the end of the Agatha Christie book, I then moved on to And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So I'm on an Agatha Christie kick. I think after this, I'll listen to The Murder on Orient Express, but I think I will wrap this up here. Thank you so much for watching. My computer is having a meltdown trying to process everything that's happening. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up, click that subscribe button and notification bell to be alerted every time we post a new video. Comment down below your thoughts, which paper you prefer, and anything else you'd like me to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!